Now, we'll close this section the way we began it, with a focus on Murray's democratic ideas. We've asked Jonathan Silver, editor of Mosaic magazine, and John Wood Jr., the national ambassador of the Braver Angels organization, to discuss Omni-American culture and the American future. Each was provided a copy of an interview from Murray Talks Music, a volume edited by Paul Devlin with foreword by Gary Giddens, and afterwards by our own Greg Thomas. Welcome, John and John.
John Silver and John Wood, welcome.
Good to be with you guys.
Wonderful. John Silver, please take it away.
Okay, so thanks. My name's Jonathan Silver. I'm the editor of Mosaic and a magazine of Jewish ideas and public affairs, the host of the Tikva podcast. I'm really happy to be sitting with John Wood of Better Angels. John, our charge is to discuss this conversation, this interview that the American critic Albert Murray gave to Russell Neff back in 1990. I'd not known about this interview until preparing for this discussion today, but I thought it actually taught me three big things about America and American citizenship. Here's what I learned. The first thing is that Murray says we're in danger of losing a command of language, and that means a loss of precision in dealing with actuality, in dealing with the facts of life. And that always means, that always puts us in trouble. It puts our civilization in trouble. Now, the capacity for articulate speech is the tool that we have to describe the world, its majesty and its misery, to one another and to ourselves. The corruption of language has civilizational consequences. And I think that the place in our culture now, where language games are being played with consequences that we cannot possibly foreknow, is in the domain of sex and gender. And I don't know how a culture can recover from replacing the word mother with the phrase birthing person. Now, the fact of the matter is that every single woman and man walking this earth was born from a sort of miracle that biological science can observe and describe, but not fully explain. And in that mystery, something distinctive and precious points to women. And if we lose that precision, we lose something important. But I want to note that Murray's point here has special relevance for us as a democratic citizenry, because we come to understand our own thoughts, he seems to be saying, through the very relational act of communicating together. The second big point, losing our tradition means losing our way. Tradition, neither for Murray or for me, does not mean just believing in every particular of what our ancestors believe. It's not about recapitulating the past. For Murray, tradition is necessary for reform and innovation. It is for elaborating something new. So how can the past be used for something new is a kind of puzzle, and I think that he solves that puzzle, because for Murray, tradition conveys from the past to the future something he called in the interview forms. It is, he writes, a principle of dealing, a basic principle of dealing with life that should underlie, forms should underlie all art forms. And we need an adequate thing to emulate to fulfill our potential. Now, this is one of the great practical lessons that music teaches to school children all across our country. If you don't know your scales and the chord progressions that underlie all of our melody, you will be literally inarticulate. And I think Murray challenges us to wonder if the same forms that animate music at its best also might animate democratic civic life at its best. And if we need to master the forms of the blues to say something articulate, let alone intelligent, about jazz, in jazz, we need maybe to master democracy's forms in order to say something articulate in our common civic life. The third big thing that I learned from Murray's interview is that the way he understands the difficulties and the obstacles that are inherent in human life. Now, these obstacles are not evenly distributed, and neither are human talents. But just as every person on this earth has some kind of talent, so every person on this earth also have things in their life that they have to overcome. That is unavoidable and inescapable. And here's Murray's comment on that fact. There's some kind of majestic human potential that is made manifest in overcoming hard things that happen in life. I think this is the fundamental assumption of the poetry of the blues. And it is what I think Murray means when he advises that instead of saying in the face of a difficulty, why should this happen to me? He instead would recommend that we say, what am I going to do about this situation? To me, these are the three great points from Albert Murray, and I think they amount to some very wise counsel for us as democratic citizens.
Well, that's an extraordinary overview, Mr. Silver, and I think that you really do capture some essential dimensions within which, if we are truly going to embrace an Omni-American future, we need to find ourselves sort of deeply in touch with. By the way, you came very close to quoting Dave Chappelle in your first point. I noted about motherhood and language, so I thought that was interesting to pluck out. But I'm a person who was raised on a bandstand in a family that you might essentially describe as Omni-American. My father's Anglo-American from the South, white jazz pianist. My mother's an R&B singer, African-American from inner city Los Angeles. Music was the tie that brought my family together. The frictions in broader American culture served as tensions in my own home, which did a fair amount to, I think, pull my family apart a bit. So I've sung the blues in the context of my own familial experience, just as we all have in the context of American democracy. But there is a resilience in the blues, in jazz, that is in touch with the deep exploration of the human spirit in the context of living, in the context of overcoming heartbreak, tragedy, that makes tragedy, in reference to one of our previous speakers' observation, sort of, a fair kind of marker by which to anchor our understanding of the true character of democracy, insofar as democracy is meant to help us not just celebrate victories so much, it's not really the chief purpose there, but rather to sort of anchor human endeavor in a way to where even when we have failed, we are failing towards something, towards some greater progress and towards some greater relationship and connection with one another. Because as we come in the process of dialectic to be able to articulate the things that we believe, we are pushed to be able to understand ourselves better, to share of our soul gifts, if you will, with others in dialogue in a way that enriches our understanding of the society we share and of the kinship that we share in being members of a given society, right? And so this sort of tilts into the idea of form a bit, the idea that it is in form that we discover our character. And so, the scholar Yuval Levin writes about the sort of decline of the American social fabric and our ability to relate in the context of democracy in the modern day by noting the fact that while we still have institutions, the idea that institutions help give form to the virtues and characters of the people within them so that they may serve a greater good in the context of society, that the establishment of the law and the courts is meant to form an ethos of justice and integrity, that the form of the university is meant to give shape to the virtues of objectivity and the pursuit of truth in scholarship, that we do not put ourselves over and above the form in which we occupy in an institutional context, because that gives birth to a fruit of character that is meant to be shared throughout society, more than just our own personal self-aggrandizement. That metaphor for formation is so extraordinarily captured, in the idea that in the musical context, in a musical structure, we, even if we take a solo, do not rise above the band, so to speak, but have our place within the ensemble. And so there's this way in which a proper understanding of democracy is one that rests itself in an anchoring of a certain sort of humility, wherein even if you have a particular line that you are meant to play and a particular moment to shine, you realize that is given value only in the context of the dialogue of all of the other voices that takes place in the music that is sounding forth. And so when we think about this idea of the Omni-American, when we think about this idea of an American experience that it's the product of so many different perspectives and pains and histories and tragedies, but also triumphs and overcomings, joining streams like tributaries into a mighty river, it is proper to sort of think about this in a musical frame that allows for even dissonance between notes to be a part of the greater sort of beauty of musical expression. And so part of what Murray talked about was this sort of flexibility that comes with jazz that is, sort of a little bit different than you have in other musical traditions, where every note has to be played precisely as it is written on the page. And if you fail to do so, maybe you're not executing your craft properly. But in jazz, there is room for an improvisation in which something that seems like a faulty note introducing a point of dissonance can actually resolve its tension in the course of further play, in the course of further exploration. And again, the analogy to the way democracy truly is striking, because in democracy, in the context of self-government, where we enter into dialogue with one another, we inevitably experience tensions between our experiences, between our perspectives and points of view. But there is a growing together, which is the premise of our sharing in the project of self-government, which is, in essence, that dissonance, achieving resolution over time, right? And so it is a remarkable opportunity from my vantage point to be a part of a larger conversation with individuals like yourself, Mr. Thomas, and so many others, who are giving articulation to this phenomenon, this musical character and personality of American democracy, in a way that can begin to restore the precision of language by which we come to understand not only the nature of the American project, but the nature of ourselves as individuals in relationship to one another and community as a part of it. And I just couldn't be any more thrilled than I am to be able to play a small part in contributing my own few notes to this honoring of the legacy of Albert Murray and this vision of the Omni-American as we continue it here into the future.